Get the whole story.
Well, good morning to you. Welcome. You're watching Morning Prime on this 27th day of December. I dare say Merry Christmas. And even as we anticipate the new year, a happy 2022. My name is Jesse Rogers. Even as you celebrated throughout the weekend, and it's a holiday today, mind you, according to the government, I'm sure you are definitely enjoying this Monday morning wherever you are. But we're here to inform you, irrespective of it being a holiday or not, on the latest news making headlines. As always, Kenya's Vol newspaper, The Standard, and the Daily Nation are set to keep you abreast on the latest news making headlines, and we'll get to evaluate some of these headlines even as we take a look at some of the developing stories in the course of the day. So as I mentioned, we'll definitely begin with interrogating some of the top stories. Later on, feel-good stories in terms of features later on during the broadcast. So stay with us for the 2 hours plus as we inform you about the latest news making headlines. Perhaps let's begin on the international scene as we canvass some of the top stories making headlines. And that's, of course, in line with Tutu's final bow. The South African icon, the moral giant and rights crusader Desmond Tutu died at the age of 90, leaving a rich legacy of fighting for humanity. That's one of the major international stories emanating from the motherland, Africa. Of course, President Cyril Ramaphosa breaking that news just yesterday. And this is a man who was heralded as a moral icon in the country, an anti-apartheid hero. And Desmond Tutu has definitely left a big mark in terms of Pan-Africanism and leadership across the continent. That story has been covered on page 4 and 5 of today's dailies. But as I'd mentioned, perhaps you can take a look at some of the international stories if we have them. Okay, let's start with the Citizen. There we have it. Bishop Tutu, a moral compass for South Africa. As we mentioned, that's one of the major stories. A man who painted South Africa as a rainbow nation died on Sunday at the age of 90. The moral compass of the country and perhaps the continent as well. Never afraid to speak truth to power, whatever its creed. You can find more details on that particular article right there. But obviously, many African leaders mourning the late Desmond Tutu. Even as Zanzibar's health minister has tested positive for COVID-19. That's the latest from Zanzibar and Tanzania. UAE suspends flights from Tanzania, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Nigeria. Well, not good news right there for the travelers. Find out more in terms of the health hazards, perhaps. Anti-apartheid Archbishop Desmond Tutu dead at 90. That story, of course, making headlines across the globe. Let's take a look at yet another page as we interrogate some of the developing stories happening around the continent. Crossing over to CNN World News this time round. What happened to the hippie trail? An interesting one right there. The route was once seen as a gateway to paradise. Then it all fell apart. An interesting read. How to limit the heightened risk of infection during travel, according to an expert. Find out more even as deadly flooding hits Brazil and displaces thousands of people. That's sad news right there. But that seems to be the latest happening from across the continent. Definitely find out more. And we have the Daily Monitor right there. I have prepared for my death. Desmond Tutu's words, where he said, I have prepared for my death and have made it clear that I do not wish to be kept alive at all costs. He said in an opinion piece in the Washington Post in 2016. Remember, he's been battling cancer for quite some time. in and out of hospital due to such complications. But definitely we continue mourning even as we celebrate the life of Desmond Tutu. There you have it, Desmond Tutu, South Africa's moral compass. It's a great privilege, it's a great honor that people think that maybe your name can make small difference. Some of his words have definitely been quoted all around the continent, and equally the Daily Monitor has highlighted some of them, including some other stories from across the continent. Somalia Prime Minister and President bicker in public over the right course of elections. Definitely heated when it comes to election processes, not just in the country, but Somalia as well. Find out more on that particular article, even as us ourselves as Kenya prepare for the 2022 general elections. That seems to be the latest headlines across the continent. We'll definitely keep you updated, even as I mentioned, the Standard and the Daily Nation going big with tributes which continue flowing in for South Africa's icon, the late Desmond Tutu, who died just yesterday, died at the age of 90. Let me just highlight what you can expect on the front page of the Daily Nation before we take a look at that particular story that was aired in terms of the tributes that continue to pour in for South Africa's Archbishop Emeritus. So the Daily Nation going big with that particular story. Desmond Tutu, an African icon of peace. This is what you can expect on the front page of the Daily. An obituary right there of the famously outspoken Archbishop, even after the fall of the racist apartheid regime in South Africa. He died yesterday at 90 and never shied away from confronting the country's shortcomings, and was regarded the moral compass of his beloved Rainbow Nation. Never afraid to speak truth to power, whatever its creed or color. There you have it. Special coverage on pages 2 and 3 of the Daily Nation, even as they highlight other stories on the back page right there. If I can just flip, Malindi Space Station puts Kenya on the global map. It was the first to establish contact with new telescope on its 1.5 million kilometer journey. Find out more about the James Webb Space Telescope, even as immigration against Huduma Bill proposal to replace it with NIMS. Find out more on that Immigration Act through the Huduma Bill 2021. That's on the Daily Nation. And perhaps let's highlight what's on the Standard just briefly. On the front page, this is what you can expect. Election cases set to shape 2022 succession. And it's all about the big verdicts that's set to be awaited right now, where stakes are high in the political arena, with 5 legal tussles playing out at various levels of the judiciary, all seeking to influence how the Uhuru Kenyatta succession will be handled. There you have it. Will IEBC weather the storm? Well, we had it on the screens just now, but that's on the front page of the Standard. Let me just flip it for you. The case is right there. Should Wafula Chebukati be in charge of managing the 2022 elections? That's one of the major questions being asked. Number 2, must public officers resign from their positions 6 months to polls? We'll get to interrogate our panelists' views on that, even as we anticipate some of the court's verdict on some of these cases, including who should be awarded the multi-million ballot printing tender. Will the elections be held at the same time as the BBI referendum? A key contention right there, even as the question of should the option of none of the above be on the ballot papers. A busy year come 2022, and the Standard has highlighted some of these key cases that you should expect come 2022. Even as Tutu's final bow has been highlighted right there, a man who left a legacy of fighting for humanity, 90 years of age, definitely rich of life and experience and impacted South Africa and the continent in one way or the other. Page 4 and 5 of the Standard highlighting the latest you need to know about Desmond Tutu. Perhaps let's take a look at some of the tributes that have continued to pour in for South Africa's Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu, the Nobel Peace Prize laureate and anti-apartheid icon who died on Sunday. Tutu, who passed away at the age of 90, is credited for the anti-apartheid campaign alongside fellow Nobel Prize winner Nelson Mandela. World leaders have described Tutu as a selfless man and an iconic African hero, without whose input racial freedom in South Africa would not have been realized. Burimi Mwangi with that report.
Best remembered for the anti-racial segregation campaigns that severally put him at loggerheads with the white supremacist government, Archbishop Desmond Tutu was in 1984 awarded the coveted Nobel Peace Prize. Tutu's death comes only weeks after that of South Africa's last apartheid-era president Frederick de Klerk, who died at the age of 85. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa described Tutu as an iconic spiritual leader, anti-apartheid activist and global human rights campaigner, adding that the Archbishop's death marked yet another chapter of bereavement in the nation's farewell to a generation of outstanding South Africans. In a message of condolence to President Ramaphosa and the people of the Republic of South Africa, President Uhuru Kenyatta mourned the ever-smiling Archbishop as an African icon of freedom, peace and reconciliation, terming the passing away of Tutu as a big blow to not only the Republic of South Africa, where he leaves behind huge footprints as an anti-apartheid hero, but to the entire African continent where he is deeply respected and celebrated. Former Prime Minister Raila Odinga, in his condolence message, said the continent had lost a leader of rare qualities and abilities, an epitome of bravery and resistance, adding that he treasured moments he had to exchange views on the future of the continent. A continent, Raila says, Tutu did so much to lift in the eyes of the world. Tutu has been widely acclaimed as a leader of Africa's moral conscience and the great reconciler of the nation divided by decades of racist politics. Tutu was a longtime friend of the late Nelson Mandela, alongside who he led the anti-apartheid campaigns. The two for a long time lived in the same streets of Soweto, the only one in the world to host two Nobel Peace Prize winners. He died aged 90. Born in October 7, 1931, Tutu was the son of a domestic worker and a school teacher. He followed in his father's craft and trained as a teacher. The open discrimination faced by black children in the apartheid-era education system prompted Tutu to become a priest, where he would from the pulpit lead the anti-apartheid campaigns. He died aged 90. Burimi Mwangi, KTN News.
Okay, so tribute definitely continued pouring in for Desmond Tutu right there. The rights campaigner who said very undiplomatic things on page 2 and 3 right there. Key milestones in the life of Desmond Tutu has been highlighted on the Daily Nation, but equally the Standard going big with some of the key quotes, the great quotes by Desmond Tutu. Allow me to just read some of them before I deliberate with my panel right here. He said there comes a time when we need to stop just pulling people out of the river. We need to go upstream and find out why they're falling in. Those are some of his great quotes. Yet another one, if you're neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. Definitely impactful words made by Desmond Tutu. Don't raise your voice, improve your argument. Perhaps a word of advice to our political leaders right there. There is only one way to eat an elephant rather, a bite at a time. We may be surprised at the people we find in heaven. God has a soft spot for sinners. His standards are quite low. There you have it. Quite undiplomatic in one or the other, but his words have definitely echoed through generations and throughout the continent. And they've equally highlighted right there on page 4 some of the tributes from the Dalai Lama, who's a spiritual leader, all the way from Boris Johnson, the UK Prime Minister, Cyril Ramaphosa, equally describing Desmond Tutu as a patriot without equal, a leader of principle and pragmatism who gave meaning to the biblical insight that faith without works is dead. There are some of the tributes that continue falling in for the late Desmond Tutu. Allow me to interrogate what my panel or panelist thinks of Desmond Tutu, his life, and perhaps what we can mirror in terms of what he stood for as youth in the current day and age. I'm joined in studio by Muthiora Kariara. Thank you so much for your time. Happy festivities, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Asante for your time.
Thank you very much, Jesse.
Yeah.
I hope your Christmas went well.
Definitely went well. I wish I wasn't working though.
What did you do for Utamaduni Day?
I think I relaxed. I did a little bit more of binge watching and spending time with family. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
You should make sure that the next time, part of your family time is spent in entrenching the values that we got from our forefathers, because that's part of Utamaduni. Besides visiting sites that remind us about what we really are about as a people.
But you know, Tamaduni Day sort of takes time to settle in. We're sort of used to Boxing Day. So 26th, you wake up and your program to say Happy Boxing Day took a little bit of time for me to readjust. But anyway, that's on a light note.
And by the way, allow me to say this. Utamaduni has something to do with culture. And unfortunately, Kenyans are not in the culture of giving gifts, so that after Christmas, people have boxes to unpack.
True.
So I guess it's a good thing we shifted it from Boxing Day, but Kenyans need to catch up with the culture of giving. That used to be part of us as Africans.
Exactly. There's a reason for the season. We should always remember that. He's a party leader of TGN. Asante sana for your time. And perhaps let's start with what you remember the late Desmond Tutu best for.
He was a firebrand. He never minced his words. But what's most important about his journey is that he was a champion for interracial reconciliation. South Africa is one of the countries in the world where we've had the most divisive society. So a society that is very unequal. Before, we had the blacks versus the whites. And then after that was addressed, then there is the big divide between the haves and the have-nots. And Desmond Tutu made it his life mission to address those differences. You just mentioned some of his quotes. And one that I particularly like is that when you're neutral in a situation of injustice, then you're choosing the side of the oppressor. And there is a friend of mine who used to say that if you die and you go to heaven, having lived in a country where there was injustice, then God will question you for accepting to be oppressed. So imagine if you have position and you never used it to speak truth to power. Desmond Tutu lived a rich life. He was not only a moral compass for South Africa or Africa, but for the world as well. There is the first quote by the Standard today that they have said that there comes a time when you have to stop just pulling people out of the river, but you have to go upstream and establish where people are falling in. You look at whatever problems we are going through in our country or even Africa, and you realize that oftentimes we treat symptoms. And so if we look at his life, there are lots of lessons.
We definitely can draw a lot of lessons. And since we're speaking about quotes, I just searched one right now. First, they came for the socialist. I did not speak out because I was not. You know, they came for the trade unionist. I did not speak out because I was not. They came for the Jews. I did not speak out Because I was not a Jew.
Yes.
Finally, I did not have anyone to speak for me, you know, when they finally came for me. It's not his quote, but it sort of mirrors what we should emulate as society. And I think this is what Desmond Tutu stood for. So let's interrogate the role, the civil, what's it called? Not just the government, because we can't leave politics to politicians in one way or the other.
It's way too
important. You know, the journalists have a role to play. Civil society has a role to play. What exactly, looking at the life of Desmond Tutu, can we borrow, especially as civil society right here in the country? During an election year, we well know of how critical, you know, criticism towards the government should be, you know?
Yes. First and foremost, let's realize that he's a preacher who emanated from a society where black people were not supposed to be heard. But then he chose to speak out. So, number one, we have to learn that it's important for us as human beings to be courageous. As long as you're fighting for a just cause, do not worry about how things will pan out. Just know that history will bear you outright eventually. Now, unfortunately, I have seen stories online. There was a story about a famous public figure in Kenya who was abducted and tortured. And it appears that we are again looking at things without the tolerance we have been told we need to have when interrogating matters politics, because politics is transient and there are no permanent enemies or permanent friends. Yeah. And like Desmond Tutu used to say, we are all equal. Let's treat ourselves or each other with respect. If injustice is being done or perpetrated to your opponent, do not see that as justice. Because an injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. Yep. So as we go through this political season, I urge people to realize that right in our midst, there are people who have championed for just causes, for human rights, for human dignity. And history has borne them out. Let us seek to be those people. Okay. We all can make a difference, and each one of us should try. Our lives need to have purpose, and if we mean for Kenya to be a great country, then we, that is you and me, need to stand up. We need to inculcate a culture of tolerance. Okay. We need to know that we were bequeathed this country by those who came before us, and we must be mindful to give to the next generation a better country than the one that we found.
Speaking of a better country, I'm just looking at an article right here on page 3 of the Daily Nation, how Tutu's arrival in Nairobi unlocked the 2007 Paul Rouse standoff, where the man of the cloth was able to convince former President Kibaki and ODM leader Raila Odinga to drop their tough stance. That's in around January 2008 when he first arrived in Nairobi. And I remember him mentioning, especially to the media, you know, that they are ready to talk. I think he was quite instrumental in Kenya sort of becoming a better country. And looking at the tough period that was 2007-2008 and the role he played, I think it definitely goes without saying he will be missed, just borrowing from the tributes from these leaders as well.
At the time when he jetted into the country, people had gone berserk. We had totally turned against each other, and what mattered then was, you're not from my tribe, and so you're my enemy. But then borrowing from his rich experience in reconciliation and handling matters where people came from totally different backgrounds, he was able to speak power to the then president, Mwai Kibaki. And fortunately, Raila Odinga is one who, if we look at history, listens and puts country first. And I guess Desmond Tutu told him that if you look at South Africa, there was a point where our country could have gone to the dogs, but the leaders decided to cede ground And so you and President Kibaki can do the same for the sake of the country. And because of his stature as a Pan-Africanist, these two gentlemen listened.
Okay.
And they went to the negotiating table with clean hands, and a deal was brokered which brought the peace that was eluding this nation.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I'm just pushing it fast forward because I remember something about not always being a yes man, and I think we can equally emulate that from Desmond Tutu. Of course, he called out the anti-apartheid regime, played a key role alongside Nelson Mandela and the rest. But when it came to criticizing his own government, remember when he called out ANC and said he wouldn't vote for them again because they had lost their moral compass when it came to fighting inequality and all that. That's a party he had stood by since time immemorial, and it reached a point where he actually called them out. Do we need that as a country right here in Kenya? Because I think we have a lot of yes men, very little opposition in the country calling out the government, you know?
Yeah, and history bears out that we've had Desmond Tutus in Kenya. We had Ndingi Mwana Nzeki, and I guess they emulated him because they were in the same generation, different fights. We've had Bishop Muge, there was Manasseh Kuria, we've had Gitari, and lots of others who spoke truth to power. And you see, when you go against an establishment for which you lived your life, people listen because you're proving that truth is truth regardless of whoever is stepping on it. And that's what he did. Fortunately, if you go to his track record, you'll realize that whatever he spoke, he lived. So he had that moral backing to call out those who were contravening whatever values society is supposed to espouse. So yes, we've had luminaries from the clergy before.
Yeah.
We can have them now. And you remember there has been talk that our church has not punched the weight that it should punch. And fortunately, there has been movement and shifts in how the church handles politics and politicians. There is a time things were going downhill, but it appears like that ship is now steadying.
It's stabilized there.
We just hope that the few clergy leaders that have spoken about issues out there remain on that path, because if we lose it, then we clearly are losing direction.
Definitely, and I think the law equally has a role to play with the church sort of, reeling in. I think it was November, December when we had that deadline in terms of fundraising, where IBC sort of pulled the plug in one way or the other. So that sort of limited what we used to see in churches. But allow us to interrogate our other panel. Joining us virtually, I think it's from Garissa, Bashir Wakili. It's always a pleasure to have you with us. Good morning and happy festivities. Or you're in Mombasa, I meant to presume. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jesse. Thank you so much. I had technical hiccups, but I think I'm now a bit fine. Sorry about that.
No problem. Pole, nimekurudisha Garissa kidogo, but it seems you're enjoying your holiday. Let's talk about Desmond Tutu. How best do you emulate the man that was Desmond Tutu, looking at the life and times?
Absolutely, Jesse. I would, there are those giants who you may not have difficulties in describing them. I think he is one such example. Without any difficulty, it is easy to put it as it is that he was the real or the true beacon of morality. He was a Nobel Peace Prize winner. We know his efforts in the anti-apartheid efforts, the battles and all that. And I think, Jesse, one of the things I really pick out as a person is that the kind of strategies that he had employed to fight against black oppression on the basis of race is that he at all times adopted non-violent means, and I think that is such a big thing that we should all emulate. That tells us that in this current day and age of this specific time of our globe, there are many ways of addressing injustices non-violently without adopting any violent means. I think for me, that is the best thing I can always think of, dream of, always remember him of. So one thing that stands out is employing non-violent means to address injustices. And I think, Jesse, the world has lost an icon, an example, a father, a great person. We all condole with the family, friends, and the people of South Africa and Africa in general. And I think what we need to do as a people is to adopt or appreciate the various qualities left behind as a mark for us, and the kind of marks that we can at all times adopt, take up, appreciate issues to do with addressing any form of injustice, that we shall not accept injustices, but how do we address them? We address them non-violently. Great lessons, great issues left behind. It's for us to emulate and see how we can put the same into practice, Jesse.
Okay, speaking of what we can emulate from this man that has definitely left a legacy, the role of civil society and how instrumental civil society, and in particular Desmond Tutu, was during that apartheid regime. Let's reflect on what we should do, perhaps as members of the civil society, journalists, lawyers, and other members of the civil society, especially during a transition period come 2022, when the politics really gets heated and there's so much noise. And at the end of the day, we need to be the sane noise, if I can put it that way. Well, what's your take on that, Bashir?
Just to put it this way, if we are honest about what those persons who have been helping, largely in our country, it is members of the fourth estate, that is the journalists. And I know the kind of critical role that they have played in transforming both the politics and the economy and the health of our day. And I think the kind of proactiveness that we expect, especially on the part of the lawyers, on the part of the journalists, on the part of the clergy, has been outstanding. The only little bit, actually, Jesse, that has been lacking is these other parts that these people we call the humanitarian or the CSOs and the specific organizations that we have always expected them to be proactive, maybe in issues to do with the enforcement of rights, the Bill of Rights, maybe combating atrocities against the human life and all that.
Okay.
I think for me, let me put it this way. When you look at the kind of activeness that we have appreciated, or the kind of sectors that we can look at and say, indeed, good job, those are on the part of the lawyers, on the part of the journalists. There are those who have actually slept on the job, and I may not blame them in totality. It is because the biggest problem, I think, what has happened is the civil society space has, in a way, shrunk. And I think that might also be pegged on, or the cause of that is because of, I think, governmental policies. So I think there was a design, in a way, by the government to have that specific space shrink. Just the CSOs have been so active in I think about 10 years ago than today. But I think all is not lost. We have a lot to do, all of us, when we join our hands together with the members of the clergy. But I think, Jesse, let me put it this way, that the lawyers have been at the forefront in combating any rights against injustices so far. I give the biggest credit to the legal fraternity.
Oh, of course, it seems you're patting your own back in one way or the other. But what of what people at times refer to as judicial activism? Even as you're patting yourself on the back, it's proper to criticize where it's meant to be. What would you say about that?
Absolutely. You see, Jesse, in our country, there's nothing like judicial activism. The moment you put it that way, it is about expecting the judiciary to take up the space or to fill the shoes of the civil society organization.
Fair enough.
That is not what the judiciary does. What happened is those persons who are so keen at maybe maligning the judiciary in bad faith, or throwing an egg on the face of the judiciary, are the ones who have ended up appreciating the term judicial activism. But that's not the case. All that the judiciary did was to basically enforce the constitution of this republic, and especially on chapter 4 of the Bill of Rights. Basically, that is it. No judicial activism. It's about sticking to the rule of law, promoting the rule of law, and ensuring that the rule of law is defended at all times. That is the place of the judiciary. Nothing like judicial activism, Jesse.
Okay, well noted. You've definitely taken that point across. Nothing like judicial activism. And perhaps, Muthiora, let's deliberate on that even as we take a look at this particular headline on page 5 of the Daily Nation. Itumbi's abduction. No arrests amid queries on vehicles' number plates, where the number plates of that car reported to have been used in the kidnapping of Itumbi matched that of a different vehicle. And there's so much speculation, and since yesterday police were silent on the matter, having made no arrests as yet, as investigations entered the third day. We had members of parliament speak on this, and they were definitely calling out the government, and this is definitely not good news, especially since it's not the first such abduction. Whether it's state propagated or not, it's not the first one, right?
We cannot take this matter lightly. We know that not so long ago, Chris Msando was abducted, tortured and murdered. We know about a lot of other such people who have gone through similar, I don't know how to put it, but regrettable, avoidable and unnecessary inhuman acts. Itumbi is a Kenyan and all his rights need to be protected. So my prayer is this: we have a DCI department that is competent, well funded as far as I know, and by now they should have given a report as to what exactly happened. I started by saying earlier on that let us not look at things through the lens of who we support for the 2022 general election. Mm-hmm. An injustice on anyone is an injustice on all of us. So do not take it that an injustice on your opponent is justice. Please, please, Kenyans, let's not let this slide, because if it happens like that, then tomorrow it's going to be someone else, and before we know it, all the rights that we have gained over time, the rights that the likes of Desmond Tutu fought for all their lives, will be taken away. We're in a civilized society and we can do so much better. Our constitution is progressive. Yes, there are times when our executive has had a bit of excesses, but because our government is balanced, the judiciary has told them how far they can go. Our parliament has pronounced itself on some issues, as much as they have not fully represented the people as we hoped they would when we gave them the mandate. So as we talk about civil society organizations, yep, let's remember that they'll only be effective if the building blocks, which is the people, play their role. We as citizens need to be active. That's where civil society begins. Active citizens. See no wrong, do no wrong. Jesse, I don't know if that makes sense.
It definitely makes sense, yeah.
Building a nation requires all of us.
All right. That's really proper. And of course, that's definitely a story that has attracted a lot of controversy. But one thing we can agree on, Bashir, it definitely sets a dangerous precedence, irrespective of whoever orchestrated this. We wouldn't want such an occurrence to happen to any other member of the society. Well, what do you draw from such an intricate case?
Jesse, let me put it this way. In terms of what has happened to Itumbi, I think there are a number of things to borrow from. Number one, it is absolutely wrong. We all agree that that is a contravention of a right. It's an atrocity. There is no way we can actually appreciate that. That is an utter wrong. Just now, the problem or the next thing that we expect is investigation to be undertaken. It is for him to equally be given proper health care. The moment he undergoes the medical process and he is fit enough to maybe explain what has transpired, he is regarded as one of the principal witnesses. He is the one to shed light as to what he has encountered. And that is when maybe the specific person, such as the detectives who are supposed to unearth certain issues about this case, that is when they are supposed to play their role. But let me point this out. What has happened is, the moment I think Tutu was attacked or was abducted and attacked when he was, I think, taken to the Nairobi West, I think, hospital.
Yeah.
The court of public opinion ended messing everything up. Actually, there were a lot of, I think, propagandas and rumors that were being spread around. At some point, Kenyans are told about a mysterious doctor, a mysterious cop, mysterious number plate. I think that is what needs to stop. There are two facts here. One, there's a Kenyan whose rights have been infringed upon. One has suffered injustice in the hands of some culprits. Okay. The second thing that should follow is proper medical care, and the third thing, giving time to the investigating team. Those are the ones who are supposed to be given time to unearth the truth. But for us, what we are doing is still the same behavior that we are not trusting our good agencies. It is time to give faith in them, to give them the time to maybe look into this issue with a view to establishing the true facts about what has happened. I think our country, what we normally boast of, is having one of the best investigative agencies, that's specifically the DCI, a top criminal investigation team that I've actually personally, as a legal practitioner, I've worked with, a lot of faith, good competence, and we really believe that they can really figure out what has really transpired with a view to booking the culprits into book. Okay,
well noted, Bashir. We're definitely getting natural sounds right there in the background, but your point is definitely across. Perhaps that's one of the key issues we should definitely observe, even as we see the conversation on social media. Remember, a lot of speculation, even as we anticipate the investigating agencies to come clean on who exactly abducted the blogger Dennis Itumbi. Let's shift focus perhaps and talk about matters court cases. And the front page of the Standard, as I had mentioned earlier, has highlighted what they've broken down on page 8, the election cases that are set to shape 2022 succession politics. A lot, and it seems the lawyers will be having a field day. Allow me to start with Bashir still on this, just highlighting some of the cases right here. They mention it is now emerging that decisions made by courts on whether IEBC boss Wafula Chebukati should oversee the 2022 elections will significantly rather shape the presidential race. That's one of the cases on whether IEBC boss Wafula Chebukati should be in charge of managing the 2022 elections. Equally, whether state officers should resign 6 months to the general elections. That's yet another major decision that the courts will have to make in terms of steering the contest into a new direction. Equally, the Building Bridges Initiative case, the Supreme Court is set to determine on how the country will hold elections, if we'll hold elections alongside a referendum, if that's positive or possible to change the constitution. Just taking a look at some of these cases, Bashir, what stands out to you?
Yes, there are 4 crucial issues that are before the courts of law that will shape up how the general election shall be undertaken in our country. The first one is whether or not the IEBC chair shall be the one to steer the electoral system, electoral commission. Let me put it this way. Ordinarily, what we forget is that the courts are very practical. By the time the courts are making decisions, they make decisions based on practical issues, the real scenarios that they are faced with. The court, we do not expect the courts to maybe decide or rule that Chebukati shall not be in a position to preside over the commission. That will be so impractical. What the courts will do, the courts will be so alive to the impending election. The court will be so alive to the 8 months to our general election. The courts ordinarily shall not throw the country into a disarray, but the courts shall give a ruling or a judgment that will shape the electoral process of the country for the betterment of our country. That is number one. So at this stage, the courts shall not in any way mess the electoral cycle that we expect to maybe change in any way. The courts shall not contribute to that. So I think the court shall make a decision, a sound decision that will be so practical. This is the second thing that is so crucial to point out, is the question of resignation of public officers from office. Ordinarily, it is a requirement under Article 24(1) and 2 of our Constitution that if you want to contest in an election, you must resign at least 6 months to our election. Jesse, there was, this is anchored in our constitution. The courts shall make equal a finding on this. There were arguments as to the question of whether this is unfair on the part of those who are interested in vying for public offices. But the principle behind this specific provision of our constitution was quite sound in the first place. As it is, this is a valid section in our law. There was a contested issue within, I think, section 43(5) of the Election Act about the same subject matter. But as it is, Jesse, we expect public officers to resign from offices 6 months to election. I think that will be around February 8th, thereabout.
Okay.
That will equally shape how the election shall run in our country, because maybe it is said, actually, I've been reading the Standard News recently, that a number of cabinet secretaries might want to delve into politics, and that might force the executive to be organized in a certain way.
Just a point of clarification, Bashir, allow me to interject. I was hosting an MCA just recently, and they mentioned there's a law that sort of prohibits them from vying actively, if you're an MCA currently, from vying for the Member of Parliament position. Is there a court case perhaps challenging that particular law?
Yes, there is a matter that is before the High Court at the moment that discusses two issues. It discusses Section 43 of the Elections Act. It equally discusses Article 24, 1 and 2 of the Constitution. When you look at the question of a public officer, who a public officer is, indeed, an interpretation will be those who are presently holding the office of a county assembly office can be described as both a state office and a public office at the same time.
Right.
So the question will beg, must you resign if you want to vie for maybe the position of a senator? Now let's look at it this way. When you look at the law, you ask yourself questions. What was the principle behind the framing of Article 24? Article 24 expects that in the event maybe you are serving in a public office, in the event you are serving maybe the office of a county executive or a cabinet secretary, you must resign at least 6 months to the general election.
Okay.
There are two things here we are looking at. One, the process of transitioning once we get to the general election. In the event this was not allowed, we would have found ourselves whereby someone might be holding a very crucial office, such as the county executive committee member, maybe for treasury, might be in office until the last day, and participates in election, moves on. That tells you that the counties and the national government, maybe during the transition process, might find themselves in a disarray. That is the principle behind that specific provision. It's a very sound one. Okay. And it's not just our country, but when you look at other countries, this is a principle embodied in their statutes and their constitution equally. Just the other thing that actually comes out is something to do with elections and the BBI. That's a referendum. Then the law does not prohibit conducting both a general election and the referendum in the event the Supreme Court okays it at the same time. That is very okay. In fact, I remember there were legal pundits that were putting it this way. At the time that I think the likes of the Right Honorable Raila Odinga, before the High Court put a stop to reggae, there were those who actually advocated for having the referendum together with the general election. Because they were saying there is no need of putting the country through a referendum or something at this time. Let's say we need to consider two things, that a referendum is the same, I think it goes the same ambit or length as a general election. It's like a mini general election in a way, to put it that way. So I think it is really important to put it this way, that in the event the referendum is okay, by law, it will be okay to have both a general election and the referendum be undertaken at the same time. That is not in question. But I think the big question shall be issues to do with the costs and all that, because we know already IEBC has been so critical or complaining about the kind of funds set aside. Yes, the most and the biggest issue that equally remains is the question of printing. The printing companies for the I think the voter registration companies. Those companies that shall be printing our voter register, our ballot papers. I think there's equally a big contest on that, and I think it's presently before the tribunal. It's a big issue. That is what we equally need to look at, because I think several companies have challenged the procedure that was used to award the tender for printing of our ballot to a specific company at the moment. Those are the big three issues. And these will be really critical issues that we need to look at going forward. Well,
it'll definitely be a busy year in the courts, at least in the run-up to the 2022 general election. And I know we can't talk a lot about the cases because they're still sub judice, but Muthiora the political point of view, Chebukati is definitely a man under threat. We had some politicians sort of attack him in one way or the other, question whether he's the right man for the job. And we've equally heard of 2 court cases, I think, filed in the High Court, challenging his ascension to being boss of IEBC, bearing in mind some of the 2017 issues that arose through the general elections. The election was contested in one way or the other, and some of these cases argue that it was an indictment and the backstops with the IEBC boss, Wafula Chebukati. Well, what say you about this election outlook?
Without personalizing the matter, the IEBC that we are looking forward to running the 2022 general elections is the same one that got orders from the Supreme Court to open the servers, or to make it possible for the servers to be opened and accessed. To date, that has never been done. That was a directive from the highest court on this land.
True.
So expecting that IEBC will deliver free, fair, and credible elections in 2022 is a little bit too optimistic. In my opinion, if you ask me, we are sleepwalking into a disaster. I was less experienced in 2017, but over time, I have learned quite a bit about how the electoral process runs. And I can guarantee you that the politicians calling Wafula Chebukati names and stuff and his competence to question have a hidden agenda.
Okay.
Because clearly we had time to fix the loopholes. We did not seize the opportunity, and like I said, only God knows what will happen in August of next year. We can only hope, but clearly we know where we've been.
So what does that mean? You do not have faith in IEBC? I mean, we have new commissioners in place. It's fully constituted. From the legislative point of view, there are a couple of laws being facilitated. From the finances point of view, it seems they're being facilitated through Parliament, supplementary budgets and whatnot. I know they pulled out from that inter-budget, is it an inter-council, just recently, and that cost a star. Well, what say you about the state of preparedness, perhaps, generally?
I still insist it's the same IEBC that disregarded Supreme Court's orders. That's number one.
Okay.
And the same chairman we had then is the same chairperson we have today that's going to lead this process in 2022. So again, if we do not hope and we get into questioning the competence of this commission, then clearly we have reason to worry.
Okay.
That aside, we are in a country where I was counting and I got to 8 the number of times that the judiciary has pronounced our president as having contravened our constitution. So with such a poor record when it comes to rule of law, and I would say brave expression of impunity.
Disregard of court orders.
Yes.
Yeah.
Then clearly we need to worry about how 2022 is going to pan out.
Okay. Well,
there is a point there that has been raised about the BBI and it being coupled.
Yeah, briefly.
Yes. With the election, we need to dismiss that. As much as people can be ambitious and disregard the law, this is a matter that's still being canvassed in court. Let's wait for the verdict then, but it's highly unlikely that Kenyans will entertain the thought of BBI coming through the back door to be on the ballot in August of 2022.
Okay. Well noted. We'll definitely see how the courts pronounce themselves on that particular matter, even as we continue adding our voices in one way or the other, speculating on how this particular rulings will be made, but definitely a couple of key court battles set to shape the 2022 polls and succession politics. Read more about those 4 court battles on page 8 of the Standard. They've definitely broken them down as one of the major stories covered in today's dailies. Allow us to take a short break right here on Morning Prime. Remember, you're watching KTN News. We'll be back after this short break. When we come back, we continue with the press review. We'll take a look at some of the political statements made over the weekend. The ANC party leader has definitely